When I aged out of St. Margaret's home at 19, I walked out with a duffel bag, $217 in my pocket, and absolutely no idea what came next. Just a cheap motel room that smelled like cigarettes, some gas station sandwiches, and a beat-up car I sometimes slept in when I couldn't afford a bed, wondering if this empty, untethered feeling was what the rest of my life would be like. 3 weeks later, when every job application in town had turned into a dead end, a lawyer called and told me a man named Elijah Brennan had died and left everything he owned to the next kid to age out of St. Margaret's, which happened to be me, even though I'd never heard his name before in my life. I drove 2 hours to her office, convinced it was some kind of scam. But she slid a set of keys across the desk and explained that Elijah had grown up in foster care too, had built a quiet life as a sheep farmer in Vermont, and had decided that when he died, his 63-acre farm, the old white farmhouse, the big red barn, about 140 sheep, and a small savings account would all go to someone like him, someone like me, so I could get the second chance he'd fought for on his own. The first time I turned down the gravel driveway and saw the green pastures, the weathered barn, and the sheep grazing like something out of a storybook, I had to stop the car and just breathe, because it was the most beautiful and most terrifying thing I had ever seen. I had land, animals, a house, and no idea how to keep any of it alive. Inside the farmhouse, the furniture was simple and worn, but solid. And in the kitchen, I found a note weighed down by a coffee mug, written in careful block letters. "You've been given a second chance. This land has been good to me. It will be good to you if you work hard. Don't be afraid to ask for help. The sheep know what they need. There's a journal in the barn office with everything you need to know. Make this place your own. You deserve it. Elijah." Words from a stranger who somehow understood exactly how lost I felt. In the barn, among the high rafters and rows of pens, one sheep was separated from the rest. A thin, rough-coated animal with dark, watchful eyes that followed my every move. His name, according to the clipboard on his gate, was Walter, a lamb who'd been rejected by his mother and bottle-fed by Elijah, which meant he bonded more with humans than sheep and never really fit in with the flock. He'd been sick with foot rot, and Elijah's last note said, "Walter's looking better. Keep an eye on him. He's special." When I reached into his pen, Walter walked straight to me and pressed his head into my hand like we'd known each other for years. And in that moment, two outsiders, one in wool, one in worn-out sneakers, recognized something familiar in each other. The first week nearly broke me, waking up to a wall of bleeding at dawn, trying to follow Elijah's journals step by step as I measured out feed and hay, praying I wasn't about to kill 140 animals by accident, while I learned the difference between "they're just loud" and "something is wrong." I called the vet, Dr. Sarah Chen, who showed up in worn jeans and calm eyes, walked the pastures with me, and quietly taught me how to check hooves, spot illness, and read the flock, reminding me that Elijah had once been clueless too, and had simply refused to quit when things got hard. Neighbors showed up with casseroles and advice. Tom from the east with fence tools and jokes. The Morrisons from the west with eggs, bread, and lessons on canning. And Marcus from the south, a young farmhand who appeared whenever something heavy needed lifting or some old piece of machinery needed coaxing back to life. Through it all, Walter stayed in his separate pen, healing, listening while I talked to him about growing up in the system, about all the houses that were never really home, and about the fear that I would fail here too and lose the only place that had ever been mine. He answered with soft sounds and steady eyes. And somehow, that made the impossible feel just a little less impossible. Every attempt to put him back with the flock ended the same way. The other sheep shoved him away, rammed him, left him standing alone at the edge of the pasture.
It's okay, girl.
And each time I saw that lost, lonely posture,
Help is coming.
I broke my own real farmer rules, brought him back to his private pen, and kept him close because I knew exactly what it felt like to be surrounded by people and still be completely alone. Then one freezing March night, the barn erupted in panic, sheep crashing around in the dark. And I found an older ewe named Daisy down on her side, straining and gasping with no lamb in sight. On the phone, Dr. Chen said, "It might be a breach. I'm 30 minutes away. You may have to go in." And suddenly, I was on my knees in the straw. Gloved hands shaking as I felt not one but two lambs twisted together inside her, knowing their lives depended on someone who'd been homeless in a car a few months earlier. Just when I thought I would pass out, I felt a warm weight lean against my back. Walter, out of his pen, standing there like a living anchor, quiet and solid, breathing with me while I followed the vet's instructions, untangled the lambs, and pulled them into the world. One limp and silent until I rubbed her with a towel and she gasped awake. The other strong and stubborn, trying to stand almost immediately. When Dr. Chen arrived and said, "You did good. Most first-time farmers would have made this worse," I sat in the straw next to Daisy and her twins until morning,
Everything looks good.
Walter lying beside me,
You reacted
and realized the farm wasn't just something I'd inherited anymore. It was something I was actively saving, and it was slowly saving me back. Spring turned the fields green and relentless.
That's it.
Lambs were born, some easily, some in the kind of bloody chaos that teaches you how thin the line is between life and death. And I started keeping my own journal next to Elijah's, adding notes in my clumsy handwriting beside his neat lines so it felt like we were in conversation across time, both trying to figure out how to be enough for these animals. I lost a ewe to complications and ended up bottle feeding her orphaned lamb, Scout, who refused every attempt until I brought him to Walter. Seeing another sheep calmly trust a human was all it took, and soon Scout was shadowing Walter everywhere, the misfit who finally got to be someone's safe place. The farm slowly shifted from barely surviving to cautiously thriving. The old vegetable garden sprouted under Mrs. Morrison's guidance. Amy from next door helped me set up proper books and find better buyers. A seasoned shearer named Bill not only taught me to shear, but told me Elijah had been talking for years about leaving this place to a kid from the orphanage. And with each small success, selling wool at better prices, making deals with restaurants, fixing the sagging porch, painting the kitchen a warm color, hanging my own photos on the walls. The house felt less like Elijah's and more like mine. Then a letter arrived from a law firm in Maine, written by Catherine Brennan, Elijah's niece, who'd spent years trying to find the uncle who disappeared into farming after aging out of foster care, only to learn he had died and left his life's work to a stranger who grew up in the same orphanage he once did. She sent photos of Elijah as a teenager standing in front of St. Margaret's, the same building that had raised me, and of him as a young man in front of this farmhouse when the paint was still fresh, always with sheep in the background, reading about how he'd watched his younger brother get adopted while he was left behind, and how he'd never stopped wanting life to be kinder to kids like us. I finally understood why he'd written that note in the kitchen and why this place had come to me at all. When Catherine visited with her family, walking the land with tears in her eyes while her sons fed Walter and Scout, and her husband casually pointed out weak spots in the barn roof he could help repair. What felt like Elijah had quietly stitched together a family he would never get to see. His blood and his legacy standing side by side, connected by a man who had died 6 weeks before I ever heard his name. By the time autumn came, I wasn't just keeping the farm afloat. I was running it, paying the bills, planning ahead, and waking up each morning to a view that no longer felt like a dream I didn't deserve, but a life I'd worked for day after exhausting day. Walter and Scout became local celebrities, especially after I brought them to the county fair with a simple sign telling Walter's story. Bottle-fed, rejected, never quite fitting in, but somehow vital to everything we were building here. One foster family stopped at our pen, a quiet boy named Michael hanging back while his little sister rushed forward. And when I told him Walter's story, how he'd been pushed away but still found his place, Michael finally stepped forward and asked if he could touch him. Walter walked right up, rested his head against the boy's chest, and Michael just broke, sobbing into that rough wool while his foster parents tried not to cry behind him. After that, they started visiting the farm, and Michael slowly came to life doing chores, feeding chickens, brushing Walter and Scout in the evening light, saying more with his small acts of trust than he ever did with words. That's when I realized this farm was bigger than me paying the mortgage or learning how to pull a lamb. It could be a place where kids like me, kids like Elijah, stepped off a van and for a few hours weren't cases or placements, just children feeding lambs on a sunny hill. I reached out to St. True, Margaret's, and offered weekend visits, starting with just a few kids at a time. At first, it was chaos. Some were scared of the animals, some too rough. But Walter seemed to understand them instantly, patient with anxious hands, steady around kids who were vibrating with anger or fear. There was a girl who barely spoke on her first visit, then returned the next week and asked if she could groom Walter. Brushing his wool, she started talking quietly about school, then about living in the home, then about missing a mom who was in rehab. And I didn't try to fix anything. Just listened while Walter stood there, the same way he had stood behind me that night in the barn. Her counselor later told me she'd finally started opening up in sessions after her day with the sheep.
Sometimes I wonder if we think the same
And in that
things at
moment,
the same
I knew
time.
this farm had become exactly what Elijah
Feels that
wanted
way
it to
right
be.
now.
Not just a place to survive, but a place where broken stories could bend in a different direction. Now, when I wake up and see the mist over the fields, Walter and Scout moving slowly through the grass, kids laughing on weekends as they try to hold wiggling lambs, I know I'm not that 19-year-old sleeping in a car anymore. I'm the owner of a small, stubborn farm built by a man I never met, carried on by a rejected sheep, a handful of misfit kids, and a person who finally believes they deserve to stay. And if you've ever felt like you don't fit anywhere, maybe you'll understand why this place and this flock of outsiders mean everything to me.